What's the next level after stepping up from the Metropolitan or All-Star to the Vanishing Point or Lamy 2000? Which pens are the next step from these? So that next level that I alluded to in my intro. Yes, so I think there's a law of diminishing returns. I just kind of want to get right off the bat. You know, so those of you who aren't familiar, it's a curve like this. So as you spend just a little bit more in price, it jumps a lot up in quality and stuff like that in the very low end range. Once you get more and more expensive, the amount of difference of what you're getting for what you're paying for is diminished. Hence the law of diminishing returns. So once you hit that kind of gold nib level, you're talking about the Vanishing Point, the Lamy 2000, there's a lot of pens that are in that nice like $140 to $175 range. Really a lot of solid gold nibs there that are really good writers. Once you get beyond that, it's not like spending an additional $100 will have a same impact that will go. You know, you get some different things, but you really need to get more up into the $400, $500, $700,000 range to see some significant jumps in quality or just appeal, and it gets more varied too, because the nuances of what make these pens different and worth that much money, it gets more and more niche, as with anything that's high end, right? The more expensive you get, the less it's going to appeal to a mass market. So if you even consider fountain pens a mass market at all. So I think, you know, most gold nibs, and this is a generalization, but most gold nibs will pretty much hit a plateau. You know, for example, if you have, you know, a Pilot Custom 74, that's the same nib that's used on the Namiki Yukari, which is, you know, a $2,800 pen. Same nib though. I mean, okay, the engraving on the nib is Namiki instead of Pilot, but same thing. So in terms of actually writing better, once you kind of hit a certain point, you're not really going much beyond that, if at all. You may get into some, you know, if you get into limited edition stuff, you might have nib designs that are different, or, you know, certainly you can get into some different nibs. Like if you get into the Namiki Emperors, you can get those huge nibs that they have on there. You know, if that's your thing, that's cool, you know, but you're taking a jump there. But even still, that's not going to necessarily significantly better. But any, like, you know, the Pelikan M1000, okay, it's got a very large nib, very soft. That is a jump, I feel, from the Pelikan M800, which has still a large nib, but a slightly smaller nib than the M1000. So that's part of what you're paying for with that jump. But that's not always the case with these pens. A lot of them, once you get to kind of that gold nib level, I'm thinking specifically like Aurora, you know, a lot of these other brands where they have kind of like a standard gold nib, or like Visconti with their Palladium nib. You know, the Palladium Dream Touch nib they have on their $500 to $600 pens are the same nib that they have on their $4,000 pens. You know, so you're gonna hit a cap there in terms of how it writes. It's going to be other aspects of the pens that are a lot more appealing at that point. So when you're talking about that next level, it's not just the writability of it, it's a lot of other intangibles, or maybe tangibles, that will make the difference for you in terms of what next level means to you. You get into kind of fancier or more precious materials that are used, things like celluloids, ebonites, volcano, you know, copper, you know, other crazier things like that. A lot more embellishments and ornamentation that you get on the trim, certain things like that. You get into, you know, possibly vintage or rare materials, especially if you get into kind of custom-made things. You can get into stuff that's made out of that. Unique filling mechanisms could be some, especially you get into like pistons and vacuums and other kind of cool things like that, or other elaborate things. That could be in there as well. Enhanced build quality, just in general. Some of it is noticeable, some of it is a little less noticeable. You know, for example, you end up dealing with, you know, for example, the Pelikans, like the M800 has a lot of internal like metal components instead of having some that are plastic on like the 400 and 600. So, you know, it's gonna add some weight to it, but it's also gonna be a durability factor and stuff like that. So things like that might not necessarily be as, you know, outwardly noticeable, you're going to see some of that as you go up in price. nicer plating on the trim and stuff like that. I'm thinking specifically like Graf on Faber-Castell, instead of having like, you know, chrome plating or rhodium plating on some of their designer series and maybe even some of their entry-level Graf on series, you get into platinum plating and some stuff like that. So even in things like that, it's like, or you might have rose gold trim and instead of just gold, you know, so it's like you get into some of that other kind of stuff. Sterling silver accents instead of rhodium. It doesn't necessarily look worlds different. It's not like black trim versus silver trim, but the trim itself, you know, I'm thinking like the Montegrappa Passione, you know, it's a celluloid pen with sterling silver trim. It looks like it could be mimicked by a blue acrylic with rhodium plated trim, but it's not. It's got the more precious materials in there. So that you kind of get into the next level stuff. More just like design and artistry. Usually when you're dealing with higher end stuff, it's not as mass produced, so you're dealing with smaller batches. It gives a little more freedom to the manufacturer to, you know, design some different themes, some more, you know, intentional designs and stuff like that. They spend a little more time, a little more R&D on it. So you might get into some of that. You might get into some limited edition stuff. It might be numbered, maybe a more collectible kind of thing, maybe perhaps an investment value related to it. Though I never really tout pens as a financial investment, like just turning pens for profit. I think that shouldn't be your primary motive. And just nicer presentation too, more ornamental boxes, larger boxes, you know, pens that come with a bottle of ink and just other things like that too, you know, signed cards and stuff like that can be in there. So I think, you know, quickly you'll jump up into kind of that $500 to $800 range, getting to that next level. So whereas going from the initial levels like, you know, preppies and Metropolitans and stuff like that, then you're getting up into like All-Stars and, you know, the Monteverdi and Vincias and, you know, things that are in kind of that like $40 to $80 range. Then you get up to the, you know, the gold nibs like you mentioned here. From there, it's like, whew, sky's kind of the limit. It's not really like, I think that once you get kind of out of that initial gold nib level, the like, you know, $150 to $200 range, like what you mentioned here, the VP and the Lamy 2000. Once you kind of get out of that, once you're kind of spending more than $200 on a pen, what's 500? You know what I mean? Like seriously, I mean, yes, obviously money is got to be done intentionally, but like really once you're kind of in that space, you're into some pretty discretionary money that you're probably spending on your pens. So you're not nickel and diming so much individual pens one against the other. You know, if you're comparing two pens, if you're looking like, oh, I'm looking at a Montegrappa Passione versus a Visconti Homo Sapiens, one of them being $20 cheaper or more expensive than the other is really not going to factor into your decision very much, I would argue. So I think it becomes, the range becomes much wider once you get above that point. So some good ones that I have to actually answer your question, some good ones that I have thought of that would be really good to point out as some next levels. And again, this next level expands up quite a bit, really up to kind of $1,000. So you can interpret whether next levels really goes that high or not. That's totally up to you. I'll start off, I think Visconti is definitely a significant jump, but definitely up there and worthy of consideration. The Homo Sapiens is hands down one of the ones that I would point to the first. This is my current daily carry at the moment with a fine nib. Getting into Visconti too, some other like kind of staples in their line. The Divina as well is up there. This is pushing $1,000, but is up there. And then they have other pens like the Opera, not necessarily a regularly available one, but kind of a staple in their line as well. So that's kind of some of the higher end stuff. I think if you get into Aurora is one that I would consider, the 88 or the Optima as well. The 88, there's a lot of different versions of it. We haven't carried it regularly here until now, basically with the Flex nib coming out, and then they had the Nebulosa, which is the first purple they've done. That's a limited edition as well, so it's a little bit more expensive than the Optima normally is. Rose gold trim, you know, gold nib, piston fill, all that good stuff. Not the same, not a flexible nib on the Nebulosa though, but still a beautiful pen. So I just kind of wanted to show it off a little bit. These are some good ones. These are in like the more like 450 on up to 700-ish for the Nebulosa. I think Montegrappa, you know, you get into the copper Mule. Now this one's still a steel nib pen, gets up there in price a little bit, but just the build quality of this one and the copper, and it patinas, and it looks really awesome. So that is a good one I would recommend. And then getting into Passione, which I mentioned to a second ago, celluloid, sterling silver, all that good stuff. Nice writing gold nib, just really writes well. Polishes up beautifully. I love this pen. I think I have to mention Montblanc just because it's very worthy pens. They're definitely, you're paying a premium for the name and stuff like that. And I don't sell these pens, but certainly worth a nod to them. I got a 146 and a 149 here. These are pushing the upper range a little bit too. But both worthy pens, you know, piston filling, gold nibs, all that good stuff. Certainly worth taking a look at. You get into some Delta. The DolceVita, I think, is worth mentioning because that's been a staple in their line for 15 years. I have two different versions here. There's a bunch of different sizes they have. This is the mini one and this is the oversize. So I just wanted to show how different in size the two were, especially when you look at like the cap and then the grip and the nib too. Is just really kind of funny. Like, whee! It's kind of funny. You can actually fit like the whole body of the pen of the mini inside the cap of the oversize. So kind of interesting there. But those are kind of staple next level pens. This one is definitely on the more affordable end of the range here, the Platinum 3776. Why did I show this one? I think I'm showing this one later, actually. I'm jumping ahead of myself. Sorry. That was a spoiler alert for a question I'm going to answer in the coming up Q&A. I just grabbed it and got excited. That would I would consider more in like the next level like you had with the Vanishing Point and all that. But then if you really want to get up there, I think I've got the Namiki Yukari. This is the Moonlight version. But there's definitely a lot of different Yukaris that are around. The Moonlight's on the upper end of the price spectrum, but you can get into the Nippon Art, you know, which is in like the $700-ish range, and then you can get on up into the Yukaris, which get into the $1,200-$1,500 up on the $2,800 or so for that. So that gets up there. And then the Waterman Caran, I think, is worth mentioning too. I actually have one of these, so I wanted to show it. There's different versions of this one. Haven't done a lot with Waterman, but I do have this pen. It's a really nice pen, gold nib, all that good stuff. I have some other ones that I'll mention that I don't have to show, but are, I think, worth taking a look at. The Pelikan Souvrän series, so the M400, 600, 800, 1000, I talked about them briefly, but kind of any of the pens in that range, they vary in price quite a bit, between like $400 to $1,000 price, depending on versions and sizes and stuff like that you get. But they'll definitely be in there. Graf on Faber-Castell, they get into like several hundred on into multi-hundred. What's the difference there? I don't know, but the classic Tamitio, the Anello, those are all, you know, if you look on our site, we've recently started carrying Graf on Faber-Castell. Looking at some of those, that would be in that range. Caran is another brand. I'm not intimately familiar with a lot of their pen line, but definitely in terms of, you know, build quality and stuff like that, they're up there. So the Caran pens. Stipula, their Etruria, that's the one that, we got the Etruria Prisma that should be coming at some point. I don't know exactly when it's coming. I'm waiting for it. Got a bunch of people on the list for that one. But that's the rainbow looking demonstrator. So I'm pumped to see that one in person. I'm probably going to set one of those aside for myself. We'll see. But the Stipula Etruria is definitely kind of a staple higher end pen there. And the Parker Duofold, I think, is kind of comparable to the Caran. Different pen, but comparable, very kind of staple pen. That one is a nice writer as well. So I think any of those pens in that vein, there's a lot more here that I haven't mentioned, of course, that could certainly be talked about in here. But I think that gives you a pretty good spread, pretty good idea of what you could look into.